Hello, Alexandra here. This content is for folks interested in spiral dynamics or integral, or Terry O'Fallon's stages model, or Suzanne Cook-Greuter's work, specifically the PDF 9 Levels of Increasing Embrace. And today's topic is the piece of turquoise. And I'm talking about early turquoise 5.0 in the stages model and early construct aware in Suzanne Cook-Greuter's model. And I'm so thrilled about this content today because I wanted to end my early turquoise series with my own journey that I've been going through while making these videos. And I wanted to give an example of the piece of turquoise, because I've told you I've been going back and forth a little bit, doing parts work and feeling the parts and integrating the parts. And I have arrived at the place where I can really talk about stabilizing in the piece. So, what do I mean by peace? I mean serenity, a little more spaciousness, a little bit more stillness. And I'm a kinesthetic person, so I'll say when we come to emotions like anxiety, maybe caused by current events here in the United States in January 2026, I describe it as the pain scale of that anxiety being a lot lower. So how did this happen? Okay, let's get to it. I was meeting with some friends who are taking Terry O'Fallon's courses, and we meet online. And one person was talking about just a technique for dealing with a negative emotion, such as anxiety over current events, and just simply using the technique by superimposing a positive emotion on top of that. And she mentioned, I believe, we could start doing that at the earlier stages. And so I immediately, in my mind, superimposed serenity. And I did this for a very specific reason related to early turquoise. I had talked about in an earlier video, for some reason, I am so aware of when I have archetypal downloads. I'm an INFJ, and every time I transition stages, I download a new archetype. So let me explain. When I was 19 and I was yo-yo dieting, I downloaded, as I was going into orange, I was coming out of early orange or umber in integral, and that's the expert or self-conscious state in Suzanne Cook-Greuter's work. I was transitioning into full-blown orange. I downloaded the archetype of Artemis. I saw a strong woman feminist figure, and I remember I was walking across a bar I worked at. I was really caught up in dieting. It was not healthy. And I realized that the patriarchy wanted me to look a certain way. Remember, I'm in university, I'm taking courses, I'm exposed to feminism. And I downloaded this strong woman archetype. She just popped into my head, and the thought was, hey, slave owners lived in a world where their wives wore corsets that bound their waists and constricted and deformed their ribs, and this small-waisted thing and this controlling the body thing comes from a level of consciousness where people would be put in prison for life from that consciousness if it were occurring today. And my feminism kicked in, and I thought, yeah, you know what? I might be a little bit more curvy than I would like, but if people don't like it, they don't have to look at it. And from that moment on, I pictured this image of this feminist, strong woman, power woman, who was not slender, but was what we would call muscular and curvy. And later I realized that's Artemis. I read Jean Boland's books in, my 30s, and realized I had downloaded The Feminist. And I almost painted that image on my car. I loved it so much. That's how much I downloaded that feminist archetype. And I'm not a painter, and it would have looked really primitive, so I didn't end up painting it. But each time I got to a stage like stage green, I downloaded very much Persephone, and of course I didn't realize that till later when I read the Jean Bolin books, like 10 years later, but Persephone is receptive. I realized I had very strong intuition, as a lot of us experiment with intuition at stage green. I realized actually that I was an empath and that I was not weak, but that was a superpower that I could then set healthy boundaries around. And so Persephone is the goddess who goes into the underworld. And I was doing a lot of counseling and I realized, hey, this is not a stage that's too sensitive. It's really, really cool to do counseling and to go into the underworld and to have heightened empathy and to be very perceptive of people. So what is happening and has been happening for about 6 months is I've been on and off downloading and embodying the great goddess, who Eric Neumann, the Jungian, says is a container. And I love that because the container is empty, so it's not really personified. And I could download this archetype for days at a time and then kind of fall out of it. And very, very specifically, I'll give you the archetype from Jean Bolin. It's Hestia. You might not have heard of the Greek goddess Hestia because Dionysus, I'll anglicize the pronunciation, replaced her in the pantheon. Hestia is the flame in the center of the hearth. Just the flame, no persona. And she represents self with a capital S. And so I've been journaling about Hestia and kind of downloading her and then falling out of it. Hestia acts as a container by providing an internal sense of inner peace, wholeness, and centeredness. She has a one in herself core. She has independence and does not seek her identity or fulfillment through others. She has inner stillness and reflection, and she is able to find a meditative state and inner harmony in the midst of daily life. And how I anchored this, it happened by itself, is that I was in the, again, I'll say it again, the Terry O'Fallon discussion group, and when my friend said, hey, you can superimpose this emotion on top of the anxiety, I superimposed Hestia, and there it is. It is solid. I remember this from all my prior stages. When I get hit in the head with an archetype and it fully downloads, fully embodied, stably embodied, it is like getting struck by lightning. And, you know, Eric, it's either Newman or Neumann, the Jungian, also says that this goddess, he calls it the goddess, being the container, is also associated with transformation, and everything is in a constant state of transformation. We were talking about this in the group about how in January 2026 in the US, things are transforming. It doesn't look great in a lot of ways right now, but we don't know what could be created later because deconstruction comes before creation. And also transformation on a personal level. What happens when we're embodying sort of the archetype of the container and living that way is we're holding all our parts. There's something containing our parts. So we can still do some parts work. We're still aware of our feelings. Our feelings still arise, but I now feel like I'll give you something close to how I feel from Suzanne Cook-Greuter's PDF on the ontological ground. I'm not so much in that existential transition going into 5.0 where things feel so empty and everything's a construct and that floaty feeling because we're sort of the self with a lowercase s is getting smaller and the all is coming through us more and getting used to that wobbly state. I'm more grounded, sort of, but there's less of me because as we know, the self is constructed. So it feels like, you know, I talked to somebody else in Terry O'Fallon's group and she said, when she sort of transitioned into 5.0, it was a 2-year transition. And this is a difficult transition, and I'm hitting the 2-year point, and I've noticed, and maybe if you've ever, journaled about when you've entered certain stages or thought about it, it's usually for me a 2-year transition into a stage when I look back. So what's happening is we do the work, we do the parts work, we meet with people, we go to integral groups, we go to Terrio Fallon groups, we take Terrio Fallon classes, or we join a spiral dynamics group, we have the discussions, we read the materials, we digest the materials, and we move forward. And so why I'm so excited is that I wanted this series to be 11 videos, just like my previous playlists. 11 because there's usually one kind of bonus video in each one. So the bonus video here was healing your stage red shadow. That's actually adjacent to Turquoise, early Turquoise, when we're still doing parts work, because most parents at least have one part that could go back to stage red, yelling or dominating, even in a bad moment. So it's adjacent to parts work. It's adjacent to entering early Turquoise. And I think in the green series, I did how to talk to stage orange, and it was kind of a funny video because actually a lot of folks that I know who are in stage green or even like maybe beyond, sometimes they kind of don't remember how to make small talk, or they're not into small talk anymore. And so that was the bonus video. So I really, really, really wanted these videos to go somewhere, and I wanted them to end on a cohesive note. And that is what is happening, because all of these are coming, all the videos are from personal experience. I've lived all of these, and I wanted to give you something, and maybe you identify. Maybe you're at 5.0, or you're going into 5.5, so like early Turquoise to mid Turquoise, or you're just wondering what it's like. Of course, I'm an INFJ on the Myers-Briggs, so all of these archetypes, like I'm highly introverted, my inner landscape is very clear. Archetypes, they pop in easily, and I'm also very kinesthetic, so I'm more in my feelings, I'm more in my body, and you may or may not identify with how I've experienced any of these, and that's why it's a great idea. I was just talking to some people today about being a T or an F on the Myers-Briggs, and the T's explain things and experience things just a little bit differently, and sometimes a lot differently than the F's. So if you're a T on the Myers-Briggs and you don't quite identify with how I'm experiencing this, and you're experiencing things a little bit differently, the Integral Life videos, which you could just look up on YouTube, have a lot of T thinkers, and people are explaining things in a very T way. And I'll post one in the notes. So I hope you found this information useful. Sending you love and blessings. And I don't know if I'll see you in the next video. We'll see if I develop another playlist or take a break. Take care.